Pessoal, bom dia a todos. Para quem não tive a oportunidade de conhecer, meu nome é Rômulo, sou professor do Departamento de Esporte. Hoje estou aqui representando a Comissão de Pesquisa da EEFEUSP, que tenho o prazer de trazer para essa manhã o professor Lars. Antes de passar a palavra para ele e pedir para o professor Brian apresentá-lo, vou dar algumas notícias mais operacionais desta manhã. Vai passar para vocês essa lista para quem tiver interesse em receber o certificado da apresentação de hoje, ok? Ele demora um pouquinho para chegar até vocês e ele chegará via online. Então é importante que vocês preencham de forma legível as informações aqui, ok? Vídeo para passar. Cadê um pouquinho? Mais importante. Eu vou pedir então para o Brian apresentar, o Dr. Brian, que a gente está acostumado a chamá-lo assim de Brian. O Dr. Brian ele é jovem pesquisador lá pela Faculdade de Medicina, tem desenvolvido alguns estudos no Brasil e fora que envolvem experimentação, análise de alguns recursos ergogênicos e desempenho esportivo. Okay? O Brian, hoje ele é jovem pesquisador lá pela Faculdade de Medicina. Por favor, Brian.
Obrigado. Bom dia. Aí, como falou, tem um projeto lá na Faculdade de Medicina, mas de verdade eu vim para cá, para o Brasil, em 2011, finalzinho de 2012, para fazer pós-doutorado aqui na EFE. Aí a gente fez alguns estudos com bicarbonato de sódio aqui, mas também durante meu doutorado. E aí eu falei outro dia, quando eu estava apresentando o professor McNaughton, que durante meu doutorado, eu olhei lá outro dia, nas referências, quase 20% das referências tem o nome do professor McNaughton, né? Aí a gente sabe que é quase impossível de escrever um artigo ou falar sobre a área de bicarbonato de sódio sem citar o nome dele, né? Ele tem quase 40 anos de experiência nessa área. Aí o que ele falou, ele vai abordar um pouco nessa tema, mas também ainda hoje em dia ele está pesquisando. A gente está correndo atrás dele porque o grupo dele ainda está liderando nesse assunto. Então, eu acho uma oportunidade excepcional para todo mundo aqui de ter as informações do líder dessa área. So Lars, I've just been bigging you up, so please don't let me down. Just like to say again, thank you very much. You know, for us, it's an absolute pleasure to have a world leader in the area of sodium bicarbonate. You laugh, but you really are. So thank you very much, and let's hope we enjoy this presentation.
Bonjour. It's the only Portuguese I speak. That's it. Presentation over. Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Thank you. Some of you were at my presentation. You can hear me okay? Yeah. So some of you were at my presentation on Tuesday of last week. So some of this will be similar, but some will be different. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ergogenic aids to start with, and some of the ergogenic aids, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about sodium bicarbonate, and most of you will know how we think sodium bicarbonate works, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. And then I'm going to go into some historical perspective. Because I'm very old, I can remember the first studies in sodium bicarbonate back in the 1930s. That's a joke. But anyway, I'm not that old. But we will talk about some of the things that have come before and what we're doing now in terms of moving on from the old work that was done. And so I'm going to finish off with some previous and current views of some of the things that we're doing in my lab, and I have some very new data from one of my students that I will share with you that is a little different. Like on Tuesday, I have to say that most of my work has a performance perspective. So I want to know the effects of sodium bicarbonate on 1 kilometre time trial, 400 metre, 800 metre racing, 16 kilometre time trial, 1 hour time trial, and so on. But the data I'm going to show you today has no performance perspective. I'm only going to be interested in the effects of sodium bicarbonate on the body and on gastrointestinal upset. So you're all familiar with, if you take sodium bicarbonate, well, we'll get there, we'll talk about that in a little while. So, let's just talk a little bit about ergogenic aids, and we know that athletes use ergogenic aids to try and improve performance. So, on top of their, elite athletes in particular, on top of their heavy training schedules, they want to have things called marginal gains, small improvements. At the very top, the Tour de France cyclists, for example, most of the Tour de France cyclists are pretty much the same. Very elite, high VO2 max, they train very hard, they do long miles on the bike, so anyone could win the Tour de France at that level, but it's the athlete who can have small gains to try and improve. 1%, 2% improvement might mean the difference between winning and losing, or winning and not winning. So first or second. Second place, first loser. So for many years, even the Greeks, back in the Greek and Roman times, they used to take, the Greeks used to take mushrooms. They would eat mushrooms, hallucinogenic mushrooms. I don't know the, maybe you have to translate some of this for me at some stage, but mushrooms to try and improve performance. So, so for thousands of years, athletes have been the same. Small gains, something different. So, there's my point. Over many years, Glenhill said that there have been widespread use of ergogenic aids to assist performance, and this is the definition that I would use of an ergogenic aid. So, gives you a mental or physical edge, improvement in performance. So, it can range from caffeine. Brian and his colleagues are doing work in caffeine, work in sodium bicarbonate, but there are a variety of ergogenic aids, some of which are not harmful, and some of them are harmful. So here's a small list of ergogenic aids that athletes have used. So you can see acupuncture. Will they know what acupuncture is? Okay. So altitude training, amphetamines, not so good for you. Anabolic steroids. No evidence for anabolic steroids to improve performance, but from a medical perspective, but lots of athletes, strength training athletes, power athletes using anabolic steroids, probably not good for you. Probably. Beetroot juice, nitrates, very common, beta blockers, bicarbonate of soda, blood doping, not so good for you either. A bit further down, I don't have it, but EPO, caffeine, carnitine, chromium, clenbuterol, colostrum. Do they know what colostrum is? Right, okay, the girls are nodding, yes. Yeah, okay. Nasal strips. One of the funniest athletes I ever saw using a nasal strip was a swimmer. Why a nasal strip? He was being supported by the company. So we always have to be careful. Sodium citrate, sodium lactate, sports drinks, sports massage, human growth hormone, maybe not so good for you either. This is just a small list of the types of substances that athletes have and will use in the past and continue to use. So lots of things to get a small edge. So into sodium bicarbonate. Sodium, can I move okay, or I can move to about here? Is that okay? I normally walk around a lot, so I'm usually doing this, but I'll try and stay here. So sodium bicarbonate, not banned by WADA, so it's a legal ergogenic aid, as is sodium citrate and the other buffers. So we know that, or we think we know, that sodium bicarbonate acts as an extracellular buffer to hydrogen ions, and we've known this for a long time, or we've theorized it for a long time. And we know that fatigue, whether you take a peripheral view of fatigue, or whether you take a central view, or you take a both parts view, they're both important. You know, if you're a San Marcora psychophysiological, psychobiological model, or you're a Tim Noakes central governor theory person. But at the end of the day, all of these things have to come together to make an athlete feel fatigued. So, and we think that acid-base balance plays a part in fatigue. Hydrogen ions interact to provide acid-base balance disturbance, and the acid-base balance, if it's really disturbed, can lead to death. And it's a small window. Here's our small window, 7.35, 7.45 normal. Below 6.9, 6.8, not muscle in blood, probably leads to death, and over 8 for a alkalosis, metabolic alkalosis, probably leads to death as well. So these things typically don't happen, obviously, in exercise, but it's a small window for us to play with if we're looking at acid-base balance. So what we try to do, obviously, is to provide metabolic alkalosis, so that if we, instead of starting normally, we start here, we have a bigger window to play with. So, in my last presentation I had no pictures. I'm not a picture person, so I thought I would put some pictures in just to make it pretty. So these are the types of activities that we know can lead to disturbances in acid-base balance. So again, these are only some. So sprinting, 200, 400, 800, probably 1500, even though oxidative metabolism plays a bigger role. But in those sort of things, at this level, these are our Olympic athletes, at this level, there's a disturbance in their acid-base balance. Track cycling, this is not on your track, by the way. This is not on the velodrome that I've just seen. This is elsewhere. So track cycling of some sort. Female athletes. Rowing, 2,000 meters. Again, elite athletes, about 6 minutes for an elite rower to complete 2,000 meters. Heavyweight rower. And there's also been some study by looking at boxing, looking at some of the martial arts, taekwondo, judo, karate. So there's a lot of activity that is highly intense and eventually leads to a disturbance in acid-base balance. So we have lots of athletes to work with if we need them. That's the good thing. So I've worked with elite runners, elite rowers, elite cyclists, boxers a little bit, taekwondo. Yeah, so quite a few. None of these athletes, but a lot of these sports I've worked with to try and help them improve their performance. Now, I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah, maybe use them. These are just a couple of little examples I pulled off, funnily enough, YouTube last night or the night before. I'm better prepared than Eva, for example.
It's thinking. Yep.
So, has anyone done a Wingate test?
Yes.
No? Time to show the students a Wingate test. It's a very long 30 seconds. And normally, when we do a Wingate test in the lab, we have a bucket.
Yeah.
Especially when bicarbonate's involved.
The other?
Yeah, sure. So one is 30 seconds, and in the lab we also do a 3-minute critical power test. So this is the same test pretty much, but for 3 minutes. I should dance and sing. They've done the test, they're not just hugging the coach. It's a very big bucket. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. So, in the lab we do those tests regularly with athletes, and therefore we can use those to look at the effects of some of the buffers for performance. So, the fatigue is, as you know, is dependent on type, duration, and intensity of exercise. And again, there are both central and peripheral fatigue. And as part of this peripheral fatigue, we like to look at the build-up of hydrogen ions, potassium and phosphate, and the availability of metabolic fuel sources. But just to digress us for a second, one of the things I like about the things that you do here at EEFEUSP is that you have the ability to look at all of these things in an exercise test or in a piece of research. So that's good. I can't do that. My resources are more limited than yours. So I'm stuck with maybe these two. And sometimes this one, but usually these two. And in particular, this is the one I'm interested in. So we've said earlier, right at the start, that from a normal pH of about 7.37, if you then exercise normally, intense exercise, a couple of minutes or more, somewhere between a minute and 10 minutes. That's the sort of performance window. So if you exercise for somewhere in that window, you will have an increase in hydrogen ions, so you will decrease pH, you become more acidic. That leads to fatigue for a whole raft of reasons. Interrupts calcium metabolism at the muscular level, and so on. Lots of different reasons for that. So the theory is, and I think we're pretty much there in terms of performance. The theory is that if you give sodium bicarbonate or another buffer, citrate or lactate, then that improves or increases the number of bicarbonate ions. You have naturally occurring bicarbonate, obviously, from the kidney. You increase the exogenous amount of bicarbonate ions you have, so you have that bigger window to play with. So instead of 7.37, you might go to 7.47, 7.48. So 7.48 to 7 or 6.9, instead of 7.37 to 6.9. So you can do more work. Now, interestingly, one of the things that I think is important that I've not tested, and I'm not sure that anyone has tested yet, is the ability of people to learn to work with sodium bicarbonate. So, what we often find is that, so let's say, I'll use Brian as an example. Brian comes into my lab. He's a cyclist. So he's going to do a 2-minute all-out test. So 3 conditions, control, placebo, bicarbonate. And I'm going to give him 300 milligrams of bicarbonate. So let's say after we've done all of our testing, what we find is that in the control test, Brian's pH was 7.4, I'm just rounding numbers, 7.4 at rest, and he went to 7 at the end of the test. In the placebo, it's pretty much the same, but in the bicarb, he's gone from 7.45 to 7.15. So his pH is still higher in the bicarbonate trial than it was in the control trial or the placebo trial. So he's 0.5 of a millimole, or no, an arbitrary unit, I'm sorry, above where he was to start with. So he's still got a little bit more that he could have used in the bicarbonate trial. Am I making sense here? You sure? Yeah. So people have to sometimes learn how to work with bicarbonate so that they use all of their reserve and not just some of them. I hope I'm getting that across to everybody. I'd like to write it on the board, but I'm happy to explain it later. But, so there are some things that we still have to work with in terms of sodium bicarbonate, but we're getting there. Okay. By the way, I forgot to mention, we'll save questions till later. Is that okay? And if anyone wants a copy of the presentation, they can get that from Brian, and it's obviously going to be on YouTube. I do need to do something really silly for YouTube. Okay. So, this is the historical perspective that I promised you, and this is exactly the same as the slide on Tuesday. Work in sodium bicarbonate is not new. It started in, well, I've got a paper that's 1929, and I gave Luana a copy of the paper from 1931, this work of Denning, and this is the effect of acidosis and alkalosis upon capacity for work. So, alkalosis, bicarbonate, that's exactly what they did. The acidosis, they used ammonium chloride. It's a case study, there's one person, but it's published work. So what they did in this, they made someone acidotic by giving them ammonium chloride, and then after time they measured the performance, and then they made them more alkalotic, and they measured their performance again. It's over 2 days. So, worth noting. So, an improvement of 1%. Not much, but a marginal gain. And this was not an elite athlete, this was just a normal person off the street. So, small gains, but that's what it takes. So for those of you that are interested, there are some early papers here, 1931, 1932, 1940. It's in German. Google. Use Google. It'll translate it for you. And then again, 1953. So all of this stuff was before I was born. Just to make the point, I'm not that old. But again, the other point is that it's well over 50 years old we've been doing this sodium bicarbonate research. And my father told me when I was very young, if you don't remember history, how can you plan the future? So you have to look at these papers before you start looking at the newer information that's available. So I know that when Luana does her meta-analysis, she's going to get the paper by Doral and translate it for us. Yes, you are. Right. So, okay. So the recent history doesn't really start in 1983. It starts a little bit later than that, and there are some excellent researchers around, and there were some fantastic papers written in the early 70s, John Lindinger and others, Canadian and American scientists for the most part. But this is the Wilkes paper, is the paper that I first saw when I was a young PhD student in Tasmania. I just finished my PhD. So I needed to find an area of research, and this looked like I could do it. I could get the equipment to do it, and they had a look at 800-meter running events, and I had some very good international 400-meter runners that I could lay my hands on, and so that's what we did. So this is my student, Jo Goldfinch. She looked at 400-meter racing, and we used sodium bicarbonate, 3 trials, pretty simple stuff. So, Joanne, well, I have a thing. Here you go. So here are our subjects. Only 6 subjects. So not lots of them, but all pretty good runners. For the most part, sub 1 minute. But mean time 58.4, 58.6, 56.9. So a second and a half difference between alkalosis and control and placebo. The difference definitely between first place and not getting a medal. And in these races, the difference between first place and last place. A marginal gain. I haven't worked out the percentage, but you can do that. So, come on, Brian, work this out for me. 10%, 5.8, 4%. 2% marginal gain, I'll take it. If you can guarantee me, as an elite athlete, a 2% marginal gain, I'll take that 10 times out of 10. And most athletes would take 1%, guaranteed. So, there's the European Journal of Physiology, 1988. So, moving on. Look, this bicarbonate stuff didn't seem so difficult to do. No one had done a lot of work in the 80s with it. So, how could we change it? What could we do differently? One of the things that sprang to mind was the fact that papers that were coming out seemed to have a sort of a 1 to 2 minute time period. No one had done anything shorter than that. So I thought, okay, well, we could have a look at the timings. When is sodium bicarbonate useful? If you do a Wingate test, 30 seconds, here's a test for the students. Right? So you need a hands up if you think that this statement is correct. There is no lactate produced in a 30-second Wingate test. Who agrees with that? Okay, you'd be correct. If I do a 30-second Wingate test like you saw on the bike, then I will have an above resting level of blood lactate. How much is the resting level of blood lactate? Who's going to tell me? What's the resting level? You guys now. About just under 1 millimole, but we'll take 1 millimole, well done. Okay, but probably 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 of a millimole, resting. 30-second Wingate test, probably 4 or 5. 1 minute Wingate test, 8 or 9. 2-minute Wingate test, a little higher. 4-minute Wingate test, definitely vomiting and lots of lactate. So it seemed that it would be a really good idea to test timings and bicarbonate and see where it works. And funnily enough, for 10 seconds, even though there's lactate, and 30 seconds, there is no effect of sodium bicarbonate on performance. So that sort of tries to tell you something. Excuse me. So, interesting. And there was a paper, and we did the same paper with, or the same protocol with sodium citrate. And we found pretty much the same sort of thing. So, the next step for me, the next step was then to look at dosage. Most of the people, most of the researchers, when they gave sodium bicarb, gave it in a dose of 300 milligrams or 0.3 of a gram per kilogram body mass. That seemed to be the standard. But there also didn't seem to be a good rationale for it. So what we did in this experiment, and with sodium citrate too, we looked at 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 milligrams of bicarbonate per kilogram of body mass. And again, what we found here is 300, there's an effect. 400, there's an effect. 500, there's an effect. So, just have a think about your own weight. 500 milligrams, I weigh about 86 kilos. 500 milligrams, that's 43 grams of sodium bicarbonate. It's a big, big pile of sodium. And we give our sodium bicarbonate, or we did then, in a drink. 400 mils of water with some flavouring, shake it up, taste it. And I still forgot to bring some sodium bicarbonate for people to drink. How many people in the room have tried sodium bicarbonate? A few, the professors. It's disgusting. Maybe you need to translate that into, it's very bad. No, you don't need to translate it? Okay. It's very bad. It tastes like salt water at the beach. So you swallowed half a litre of seawater. It's not very nice. So, and now we actually use salt water as our placebo. That's not very nice either. So, but my point about showing you these two is these two studies, they're old, but they've sort of now set the scene for what others, Brian Lawano and other people are now doing in terms of dosing and performance times. So, there are two take-home lessons from this historical lesson so far. The first lesson is that the early work we did that I showed you here on time effects, we added to that and we showed that rowers could benefit from sodium bicarb. That was a 6-7 minute trial, so we knew from sort of 1 minute to 7 minutes sodium bicarbonate can be effective, and we knew that doses of 300, 400 and 500 could also be effective. So we now know that. So now, where to next? The other thing that was never explained in the research prior to that was, when do I give the bicarbonate and when do they do the exercise? So most people had used either one of 3 time periods: 60 minutes, 90 minutes, or 120 minutes. So, and that research has been going on even now. So recently, we've looked at that to see if that were true, or whether it was the same for everybody. So if I give sodium bicarbonate to you, and you, and make you then do exercise 90 minutes later, is that effective? Am I making the most of the sodium bicarbonate that you've taken? So, we set out 5 or 6 years ago now to do a little experiment and to see if that were true. So, again, my students and myself, we did this experiment, and we used fluid again at the time, and we're going to move on from there too. When I was a young physiologist, I always thought that as humans, our physiology was pretty much the same. It didn't matter whether you were Brazilian, English, American, German, Japanese, whether you were male or female, our physiology would be similar. So I always thought that acid-base balance in humans would also be similar. This little experiment just proved how wrong you can be. So, 11 participants, and resting level pH, and just after this they took the sample, and then we measured them every 10 minutes for pH and bicarb and so on. Finger stick samples, not a venous sample, so we're not putting a catheter in. But look, this guy, at 10 minutes, he achieved his peak bicarbonate. The curve is the mean. But at 10 minutes, this individual reached his peak and then went down. Most people reach their peak at 60 minutes onwards. And there's so 3 people here, 2 people here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So, changing microphone hands. I can never be a singer. Thank goodness. So, let's say you've now ingested, let's say you've been a participant in a study, and, excuse me, and you've taken the bicarbonate and you're going to perform 90 minutes later. So if you're this person, these 3 people, these 2 people, that one and that one, well, and that one, and here's your exercise, then at 90 minutes, you're past your peak. If you give it at 60 minutes, then good for this person, not so good for this one, good for this one, but these people here have all passed their peak as well. And the point of doing sodium bicarbonate, I think, is to have the maximum amount of bicarbonate ions in the system while you exercise. So, our model now, and I know that Brian and Luana don't necessarily agree with it, that's fine, I don't have an issue with that. And I think we might have some reasons why we don't see the same things, but our model now is to always, for every subject, is to always do this time to peak. So 4 people here come in the lab, the first thing we do, your time to peak, yours, 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 and so on, before the study progresses. So we want to know your time to peak with bicarbonate so we can plan the exercise regime to happen at your time to peak. So 75 minutes, that's when the activity occurs. 64 minutes, that's when the activity occurs. 93 minutes, and so on. So time for us, time to peak is really important. So this work is from one of my other PhD students who's just graduated, Lewis Goff. It's a little confusing because they're individuals, but just bear with me. So individual time to peak bicarbonate ion and pH. And you know what? They're different. And we've yet to work that out. So if someone has a time to peak bicarbonate at 60 minutes, you think their peak pH would be at 60 minutes. But that's not necessarily true. So that's something that we're trying to work out at the moment. Why don't those two things, why aren't they exactly the same? They're similar, but not exactly the same. SBC2 and SBC3, sodium bicarbonate 200 milligrams, sodium bicarbonate 300 milligrams. And what you have here is time to peak in 2 subjects, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50, around 60, most people, and then drops off. But look, some people are not peaking until 120 minutes after taking the sodium bicarb, and 300. And again, similar sort of profiles in bimodal profile here, but similar perspective for pH. All of this helps us to understand that people are different rather than similar. So adds to our understanding of why for us time to peak is important in terms of sodium bicarb. So we look at pH or bicarbonate, and again, I differ with some of my students here. My students prefer to measure bicarb. I sort of don't mind, but I always sort of started with pH. We work with some athletes in their training, and we have there are available blood pH meters that you can use to measure blood pH on the track or by the cycling velodrome. So pH is a tool for coaches as well as a scientist. So important for us, but however, this work indicates that measuring bicarbonate ion is more reproducible. So if I'm in the lab, I prefer to measure bicarbonate ions out of the blood gas meter. You get both, but the bicarbonate ion is a more reproducible measure than simply pH. So, bicarbonate has side effects. They're not deadly, they're just embarrassing. So, you guys eat loads of beans and rice, right? You should be used to this stuff. So here are some of our gastrointestinal upset things that exactly the same with beans and rice. So one of the things we're really interested in doing now, we're thinking from a performance perspective, we've answered the questions, or some of them. We know that it works. We know the time period it works on. We know the dosages people can take. The problem is these side effects. How do we make them go away? And that's what we're working on now, and that's what some of the new data I'm going to show you in the next 10 minutes or so. So we use this GI tolerable assessment questionnaire. It's a valid and reliable questionnaire. It's a visual analog scale. I'm not a fan, but it is what it is. And here are the sorts of things that you get. And you can clearly see, for the most part, that stomach cramping, belching, stomachache, bowel urgency, are you going to the toilet, and diarrhea and vomiting are all more in the bicarbonate trials than in the placebo trials. And these are differences between, I think, yes, 0.2 and 0.3. So we know they exist. They're not very pleasant. Can we make them, can we lessen the effect of sodium bicarbonate? These graphs simply show that the absolute amount of sodium bicarbonate you take has no relationship to your gastrointestinal upset. So I worked with, some of you have heard this story before, so you can go to sleep. I worked with some elite rowers. They were world champions at the time. They were going for their second world champion medal 4 years later. And they came to our lab a couple of weeks beforehand, wanted to try sodium bicarb. And these are big athletes. They're 120, 130 kilos. 6'5", 6'6". They're big individuals. Heavyweight rowers. So 0.3 of a gram with 130 kilos. It's almost 50 grams of bicarb. So anyway, one of the athletes, he's about to get on the rowing ergo, and he says, "Lars, I need to go to the toilet. I need to go to the toilet now. Door. Sorry, too late." It wasn't pretty. But he still did the test, and he still did better when we cleaned up. He did the test. So after we cleaned up, he did the test, he still did better with bicarb than they did with placebo, control. And he went on, they won another gold medal. So pretty impressive stuff. Elite athletes will undertake, they had difficult things going on in their lives from a training perspective, but if it gets difficult, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. You familiar with that? I can sing it, but I won't. Right? So, no relationship between absolute amount of bicarb and gastrointestinal upset. Again, 0.2 and 0.3. So what we've done here is we simply aggregated the scores of all of the gastrointestinal upset that these individuals had and put them into the same sort of scatter plot with absolute amounts of sodium bicarb. A bit more of a relationship, but still not great. Better than before, but not fantastic. So, no relationships observed in any linear regression analysis. GI discomfort likely unaffected by the absolute load of sodium bicarbonate, but a weak relationship for absolute amount and aggregated GI. So, last 5 minutes, I promise. So we're thinking of other things. How can we stop, are there ways in which we can bypass the gut? Or if we can't bypass the gut, can we make sodium bicarbonate less invasive on gut metabolism? So, when I go back to the UK on Sunday, I get on leave on Saturday, I get home on Sunday. On Wednesday of the next week, it's my birthday on a Tuesday, so that's not happening. So we're going to have some sublingual tablets. So they break down under the tongue. So a bit like glycerin for heart patients. So put them under the tongue, and you sit there, and you don't swallow. So they're absorbed from the mucosa in the mouth, and so they bypass the stomach. So we're starting off with small amounts of sodium bicarbonate and seeing if we can have increases in pH that way. So again, if we can, then no gastrointestinal upset because it never hits the gut. Okay? So sublingual is Latin for under the tongue, so that's exactly where it sits. And it's more direct, so that's the mechanism there. We've been using two types of capsules, and again, we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, but we've been using two types of capsules. We're starting to use enteric coating capsules, and my PhD student's been doing some of that while I'm away, and I'm going to share some really new data with you in about a couple of minutes. The enteric coating, you'll be familiar with this because if you take aspirin or ibuprofen or any of those sorts of tablets, they'll have an enteric coating. Ibuprofen, for example, and aspirin too, when they hit the gut, if they're not enterically coated, you get gut disturbance. Tipped. So we have a source of enterically coated tablets, and we're starting to use those. So they protect the drug, chemical, if you like, from the acidity of the stomach, and instead of breaking down in the stomach, they break down further into the intestine. And again, if they don't break down in the gut, no gut disturbance, and so on. So this is pilot testing. This was one subject that we had. Here's our pH and here's our bicarb. Excuse me. So here's our starting just above 4. Time from ingestion, 40 minutes, and then starts to rise, and a peak of about 80, and then decreases. pH about 7.444, 442, something like that. Bicarbonate, millimoles, starting at 24, pretty normal, and going up to about 27.5. So here's the data here. You see, bicarb, pH. But look, the good thing, nothing. No gastrointestinal upset at all. So maybe we practice. Maybe. So here's our one subject again. Excuse me. With powder in a drink and the enteric coated. Oh, look, there's a difference. That's the problem, maybe. But it's only one subject, right? It's a trial. So, blood bicarbonate, higher with a drink, pH higher. About the same, actually, in terms of time. But, yeah. What about more subjects? Some newer data from Monday. My PhD, that's how new this data is, with another 4 subjects. So, control, hey, nothing happens. Yay, great, fantastic. Nothing happens in the control. That's what we want. Solution, just leave this one alone for the time being. Don't go there. I'll explain that in a second. But look, here's our enterically coded capsule. 4 subjects. So starting around 25 and going up to 28. 3 millimoles difference. Nothing. If I have a drink, I'm going from 25 to 31. 6 millimoles difference. Fantastic. Same dose, just not happening. pH, exactly the same. pH is all over the place here, but solution, enteric. Thought we had it, not happening. But there's always a but. So we use a capsule as well. These, and this we talked about this on Tuesday too. So these are our delayed release capsules. They have not an enteric coating, but they've got a methyl cellulose coating, which again does not break down in the gut. So it breaks down. It's a gelatin capsule that's been coated with this methyl cellulose, and it breaks down in the intestine rather than in the gut. So from our perspective, we thought these might work. Great, looks like they're great for gastrointestinal upset, but they're not going to improve performance. We haven't done any performance trials yet, but we will. But Brian and I will have a discussion about 3 millimoles, whether it's significant or not, but probably not. So it looks like this capsule, delayed release capsule, might be the way to go. It might be, there is one possibility that we're only measuring them over 180 minutes. So maybe this is just sort of going up a little bit, and it'll spike out here somewhere at 240 minutes. But we haven't even investigated that yet, so you'll have to wait and see. And this is base excess, so this is the same data basically that we showed before. So, to finish off, so you don't have to listen to me for any longer. Bicarbonate's good to use for performance enhancer for intense exercise, probably under 10 minutes. There is some other data out there, and I've produced some other data for things like 40k time trial. Okay, so if you do 40k time trial, highly intense exercise, about an hour, it's been shown to work in a couple of studies. Okay. We use the individualized ingestion strategy, but Brian and the Sao Paulo group, if you ingest a meal, it might not be needed. If you do an intense exercise, under 10 minutes, I'm not sure you need a meal, but again, it's sometimes what athletes do, just because it's what athletes do. We did some work at altitude. We've shown that one of my subjects, Sandra Deb, showed that using sodium bicarbonate at altitude is better for sprint performance than not using sodium bicarbonate at altitude. Not something you have to worry about really in Sao Paulo very much, but you know, for climbers going to Everest, or you know, for the populace going to Machu Picchu or something like that, maybe taking some sodium bicarbonate drinks along the way would probably help. Typically 0.3 of a gram, but we've now shown that 0.2 of a gram you can have a performance effect and you get less GI upset. So that's a benefit of a smaller dose. We're starting to look at sodium bicarbonate as a recovery strategy between bouts of exercise. So there are often bouts of exercise, for example, cycling, track cycling, where you perform twice in a day with maybe 6 or 8 hours. So taking sodium bicarbonate helps hydrogen ions, post-exercise, helps hydrogen ions drop much quicker. Delayed release capsules, we hope, are going to prove more effective than the solution. But our hope for what we thought might be the gold standard enteric coating, not yet happening. Again, we're going to keep looking at that. It's not something we're going to drop off the planet, but yeah, it hasn't been the saviour that we thought it might be for athletes' gastrointestinal upset. Now, I finished my talk. I read this book on the plane, and I thought it might be useful for some of the newer researchers, young researchers. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving Up, and you all know what it means, right? But there's a point. If you see it and it's in Portuguese, or your English is pretty good, buy the book at the airport and read it on a plane somewhere, because don't waste your time reading it at home. But it's very good, and there is a point to the book. So not just me being rude. So this guy is Bukowski. Bukowski wanted to be a writer, but for decades his work was rejected by almost every journal, publisher. Rejection slips piled up. Hey, you're researchers. It's going to happen. After 30 years, he published his first article. Let's hope it doesn't take us that long. But went on to publish 6 books and hundreds of poems. And my point, and more to the point, Mark Manson's point, is that never give up and you never stop trying. I hope for some of you early researchers that are working on your first paper, it doesn't take you 30 years to publish it. But your papers will get rejected, and you will get frustrated, and you will get sad and put your hands in your head and start crying. We've all been there. But you get there in the end. Perseverance. So I want to thank some of my colleagues that I've worked with, again, Andy Sparks, Andrew Midgley, my ex-students, my current student, some previous collaborators from around the world, Australia and the UK and Canada. And most importantly, I really want to thank the university for bringing me here in the first place. I've had a fantastic time. I've continued to have a fantastic time. Enjoyed the wine, food, beer, all of those things. But most of all, I've enjoyed meeting all of you. You're also friendly, and you've made me very welcome into your university life, and for that I appreciate it. I want in particular to thank Brian and Luana and other colleagues within the faculty, and hopefully this won't be my last visit. I'm hoping I can make it back again. So, thank you very much. Any questions? No. Questions? There must be some.
Se alguém quiser perguntar em português, eu posso traduzir sem problema. She wants to know about the delayed release capsule.
Yeah.
So if sort of what kind of coating is it? She was asking if it's hypermellose.
Yeah, INM. Yeah, it's a hypermellose. Yeah, hypomethylcellulose. Yeah, so, commercially available.
But you said it was very expensive.
Yes, we didn't pay for them, but they cost about €2 a tablet. So for 650, it's a size 0 tablet, I think. So they hold 650 milligrams of bicarb. They're about €2.15 each, without the bicarb, just empty.
So about 8 reais for 1 capsule. And if you take a dose of about 0.2 grams, you've got 0.2 to 0.3, you've got 15 to 25 capsules, so you're looking at over 100 reais just for 1 session.
We got 2 bottles of capsules as a gift, with 2,000 capsules in each bottle. So 4,000 capsules in 2 months. So not cheap.
I had one quick question about quick question. You said, so you made the example of some individuals, they'll increase their bicarbonate pH, but even then at the end of the test, their bicarbonate pH will still be higher. So theoretically, potentially, they haven't maybe used their full potential. Considering some people think that maybe, acidosis is an important part of, your training, that will lead to adaptations. Do you think then that maybe actually, for some individuals, sodium bicarbonate might actually blunt a training adaptation if people were to take it chronically?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. And the simple answer is, no, I don't think that's the case. I think what athletes get used to doing, even elite athletes, is performing till they think they can't perform anymore. It's a little, we had a discussion during the week about VO2 max testing. So, for those of you that have done VO2 max tests, the first time you do it, you think, you press the button on the treadmill or you hunch over the bike and you think, I'm done. But 2 seconds later, you're up having a conversation with the researcher. How do you feel? Oh, I don't feel too bad. You should get back on the treadmill. If you can actually say, I don't feel too bad after doing a VO2 max test, you haven't worked hard. And I think that's the same sort of thing. They don't know how much harder they can work because they're used to giving up at a certain point. It's a little bit like where the central governor type psychobiological models come into play. This is where I'm used to giving up at, and I'm going to give up. I've done a little bit more work, but my view is that training and using sodium bicarb would be advantageous for those people. Does that make sense?
Sorry if I didn't catch it, you told, but which are the effects of the sublingual intake on performance?
The issue we have to deal with sublingually is because, or is that the sodium bicarbonate will disintegrate under the tongue, so that the tablet that we make will go under the tongue, and will go very quickly into the bloodstream without bypassing, so that they bypass the gut. The issue is if we give them too much and it goes in too quickly, then that might lead to metabolic alkalosis, and then that's hospital. So we have to be really careful with sublingual doses. So I'm hoping that we can use a much smaller dose sublingually than we have to use if we go through the gut.
But effect on performance?
We haven't done that yet.
Ah.
No, we haven't. At the moment, we're just trialing it with, just pilot testing in the lab with small amounts of bicarbonate powder. Yeah. So watch out for the paper. I'll let Brian read it and stuff. So. More work to come.
Why do you think so? Obviously, you've got your delayed release capsules and your enteric tablets. Why do you think the tablets had such a lower increase in bicarbonate?
No idea. Not a clue.
Because essentially they're both doing the same thing in that they're avoiding any neutralization in the stomach, so all of it theoretically reaches the intestine.
Okay. It's an interesting question that Brian asked, but I think one of the things might be this. So if you look from about here to here, it's remaining fairly stable. So I don't know whether that's the effects of the enteric perspective. It seems to remain stable for longer, and I think if we measured longer than 180 minutes, it would probably just keep going like this. It flat lines early, and then stays at the flat line for a much longer period of time. But I don't know that information at the moment because we only measure 3 hours. You only want to spend 3 hours in a lab with one subject.
Give me a study idea, we can discuss it.
Well, no, absolutely. I think it's something we could do, yeah. So, but yeah, apart from that, I have no other idea. Yeah. But what you might need to do is then say, okay, well, we'll measure you at 0, we'll measure you up to 60 minutes, and then come back in the lab in the next 2 hours, 3 hours, and we'll just measure you. Don't do anything, go to the library, do some study, just chill out, and see where you go from there.
Any more questions?
Is there any evidence of how to train the gut to tolerate more as we ingest?
Good question. Good question.
He asked how to train the gut in response to sodium bicarbonate.
That's a really good question. Again, it's something Brian and I are going to talk about tomorrow, about some studies, follow-up studies. You can do gut training for so you can train the gut for carbohydrate and protein and all of those sort of things. And one of my PhD students, Claire, did that for her PhD work with marathon runners. I think the only way to do that, probably, is to take small amounts of bicarbonate often, so on a daily basis. I did that back in the late 90s, 2000, but was only interested in performance, the point I made right at the start. I wasn't interested in gastrointestinal upset. So they were taking 300 milligrams a day for 5 days in 100 milligram, 300 milligrams a day per kilogram body mass, split into 3. They take some with breakfast, some with lunch, some with dinner, and then did all those things. But we didn't measure any. We made no measure of pH on a daily basis, no measure of base excess, none of that. We were only interested in, I'm starting on a Monday, I'm taking it to Friday, I'm not going to take it Saturday, but I'm going to perform on a Saturday. Does that make sense? I need to redo the experiment and look at some of those things. Sodium load, blood pressure, gastrointestinal upset, etc.
So maybe the time to peak is going to change.
Oh, look, I wouldn't even think about time to peak. You know, it's not relevant if you're going to do the, maybe if we did a performance trial every day, but if you're taking it in 3 lots, time to peak is almost out the window. So, yeah, it doesn't matter. And again, some of the work that Brian's done would suggest that if you're having it with a meal, probably don't need time to peak. So, yeah. But again, we're really interested in the gut for all sorts of reasons, and trying to get also started with blood pressure and those sort of things as well. You know, as physiologists, that if you change one thing, everything else doesn't stay the same. And that's why I like the work that goes on here, because you try and predict that and you try and measure it. That's great. You know, that's not stuff. That's not things I can do. Maybe I can do them here.
Anyone? All right, well, maybe last question.
I want to ask if the people start like to do a warm-up and to start the exercise, maybe this can change this time course or the time to peak.
Just explain to me again, maybe a little bit what they. So they're doing exercise?
Yeah, if you do some exercise like to warm up or
okay.
This can change.
Time to peak in individuals with a given dose, 0.2 or 0.3. Sorry, thank you. Time to peak with a given individual using either 0.2 of a gram or 0.3 of a gram is highly reliable, within minutes. So, but with no meal. We never give a meal. So that's one thing. What's the second part of the question? So time to peak is there. Oh yeah.
Kind of warm up.
Warm up. We never do a warm up. You know, they take it, they might walk around, we don't get them on a bike to do a warm up, and I know that's not typical, but yeah, because if you do a warm up, it'll affect their acid-base balance. Absolutely. So we don't.
I have some data with, in collaboration with some of the guys over in England regarding warm-up and the effects of high-intensity, low-intensity warm-ups on blood bicarbonate. So as Lars said, that's look out for it in the literature soon, hopefully. All right, I think we can round things off here. I'd like to say again, thank you very much to Lars for your for coming over, for accepting our invite, for presenting here. Thank you to EEFEUSP as well for allowing you to present here and to present to the students here. So I'm sure you'll be welcomed back with open arms, Lars.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.